The world doesn't just run on money, it runs on power. Richard Sterling thought he had both. He was a self-made millionaire, and he'd just traded in his quiet, elegant wife Elara for a superstar model. He was on top of the world, flaunting his new life in the $80 million oceanfront mansion he'd built as his monument. But Richard made one fatal mistake. He thought his wife's family was just old news. He forgot that while millionaires build houses, dynasties build empires, and they can tear them down just as easily. The Southampton air was different. It wasn't just clean, salt-tinged air. It was, as Richard Sterling liked to say, filtered by wealth. And his new home, a towering structure of glass, white marble, and reclaimed Brazilian teak, was the filter. He called it the Sterling Point, a 15,000-square-foot behemoth that jutted out over the dunes, defying the very ocean it overlooked. It was a house built not for comfort, but for page 6. Tonight it was performing its function perfectly. The terrace was packed with a curated slice of New York's elite. Tech billionaires clinked glasses with fashion editors. A U.S. senator was laughing too loudly by the infinity pool. And at the center of it all, holding court, was Richard. "It's not just a house," he was booming his voice, a practiced baritone that carried over the lounge music. He wore a custom Brioni suit, unbuttoned, no tie. "It's a statement. You don't buy a view like this. You earn it." His wife Elara stood near the edge of the terrace, holding a glass of Sancerre she hadn't sipped. She was watching him, not with the adoration he craved, but with the quiet, anthropological curiosity she usually reserved for the 17th century Dutch paintings she curated. Elara was a Vance. The Vances didn't make statements. They were the statement. They owned the banks that held the loans for the buildings that men like Richard built. They owned the land under the museums. They were a dynasty, and Elara was their quiet, almost forgotten scion. She wore a simple sleeveless navy dress by the row. Her only jewelry was a thin platinum watch, her grandmother's. She was, as Richard often complained, aggressively understated. "He's impressive, your husband." A voice slid in next to her. Elara turned. It was Isabella Monet. The Isabella Monet. The 22-year-old face of Gucci Prada and 1,000 magazine covers. She was 6 feet tall before heels poured into a metallic gold dress that seemed sprayed onto her skin. She was an event, a spectacle. "Richard is driven," Elara replied, her voice soft. "Driven. He's a hurricane." Isabella laughed, her eyes scanning the crowd. "He wants everyone to look at him. And you just want to disappear, don't you?" Elara felt a cold prickle. "I'm not here to be looked at. I'm here to support Richard." "That's sweet." Isabella's smile was a perfect white carnivorous thing. "But honey, in this world, if you're not being looked at, you're invisible. And if you're invisible..." She let the sentence hang, taking a long, slow drag from a forbidden cigarette. Her eyes weren't on Elara. They were on Richard, who had just spotted her. He broke off his conversation mid-sentence, his politician's smile shifting into something more primal. He began to move through the crowd toward them, a shark sensing blood. "Elara, darling," he said, arriving and placing a possessive hand on the small of her back. But his eyes devoured Isabella. "I see you've met the guest of honor. Isabella, you made it." "Richard, what a house," Isabella purred, touching his lapel. "It's so big." "I build things to last," he said, his chest puffing out. "Do you?" Isabella's gaze flicked to Elara, then back to Richard. Elara watched the exchange. It was so blatant, so lacking in subtlety, that it was almost boring. This was not the discreet old-world infidelity she'd been raised to expect. This was a hostile takeover. "Richard," Elara said, her voice cutting through their little bubble. "Mrs. Vanderbilt is leaving. You need to say goodbye." Richard's face tightened. He hated being reminded of social niceties. He hated for a split second that Elara was better at this than he was. "Right, of course." He nodded curtly at Isabella. "Don't go far." As he walked away, Isabella turned to Elara. "He's amazing. A real man. Not like those bony boys from your world, the ones who look like they've never seen the sun." "My world?" Elara asked. "Oh, come on." "The Vances, the Dynasty," Isabella said with a mock reverent tone. "All that dusty old money, all those rules. Don't you ever just want to scream, buy something tacky, live a little?" "My family values privacy," Elara said, finally, taking a sip of her wine. "Privacy is just a word for people who are afraid to be famous," Isabella replied. "Richard isn't afraid. He's building an empire. I'm just here to be his empress." The words hung in the air. His empress. Not an empress. Elara looked at the 22-year-old, a girl who had mistaken fame for power and attention for respect. Then she looked at her husband, a man who had mistaken his millions for her family's billions. "Well," Elara said, setting her glass down, "the job is open." She walked away, leaving Isabella momentarily speechless. Elara moved through the party, a ghost in navy blue, navigating the groups of people who were all there to worship at the altar of Richard Sterling. She knew with a certainty that settled like a stone in her stomach that her marriage was over. Richard hadn't just built a house. He had built a monument to his own ego, and she knew better than anyone that monuments could be torn down. The party was a grotesque success. It was written up in Vogue Tatler, and most importantly, to Richard Forbes. The headline was, "The New King of the Hamptons, Richard Sterling's $80 million statement." 2 weeks later, the smell of victory and Isabella's Frederick Malle perfume was still clinging to the curtains in the master bedroom when Richard finally delivered the blow. He didn't do it with shame. He did it with pride. "Elara, we need to talk," he said, straightening the knot of his Hermes tie in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling glass wall that overlooked the Atlantic. It was 7 a.m. He was already dressed for war. Elara was in the adjoining dressing room, a massive custom-built space he'd designed lining up her shoes. She preferred her simple Repetto flats. He had tried and failed to get her into Christian Louboutin stilettos. "Are we?" she asked, not looking at him. She placed a pair of beige flats into their slot. "I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time," he announced, as if reading from a script. "You're a wonderful woman, Elara. Your class, your elegance. But I'm not that man anymore. I'm not quiet." "I've never known you to be quiet, Richard," she said, her voice dry. He ignored her. "I'm a builder. I'm a creator. I need passion. I need fire. I need someone who sees me, not just my bank account." This was the line that finally made her stop and turn. The absurdity of it was breathtaking. She, Elara Vance, whose family trust fund could buy and sell Sterling properties 10 times over without noticing the transaction fee, was being accused of being a gold digger. "And you found that fire?" she asked. Yes, with Isabella. He said her name with a flourish. She's alive. She understands the drive. She wants to build this empire with me. I see. Elara walked past him and sat on the edge of the bed, a vast, custom-made platform that Richard had boasted was earthquake-proof. She looked small against its imported suede headboard. So I'm leaving you, he said. I'm in love with her, and she's in love with me. And the house? Elara asked, her gaze drifting to the ocean. Richard's face hardened. This was the part he had rehearsed. This was the negotiation. The house is mine, Elara. I designed it. I built it. My name is on the company that holds the deed. It's a non-marital asset. My lawyers have been very clear on that. I'm not talking about the deed, Richard. I'm talking about the statement. It's my statement, he snapped, his insecurity flaring. And I'm not going to be bled dry by you. I know how this works. You with your quiet, judgmental family. You'll try to take half. Well, it's not happening. He began to pace, his adrenaline pumping. I'll be generous, of course. I'm not a monster. I'll let you keep the apartment in the city. Elara had to suppress a laugh. The apartment was a 10-room pre-war masterpiece on Park Avenue that had been in her family since 1926. It was currently loaned to the French consulate. The apartment she lived in with Richard was a penthouse in Tribeca, also his. Richard, she said, standing up, I want nothing from you. He stopped pacing. What? I said I want nothing. Not your apartment. Not your art, which is frankly terrible. And certainly not this. She gestured around the cavernous, cold bedroom. I want my clothes, my books, and my grandmother's desk. That's all. Richard was thrown. This wasn't in the script. He was prepared for a fight, for tears, for screaming. He was not prepared for indifference. It enraged him. You can't be serious, he stammered. What will you do? Where will you go? Run back to your dusty old uncle. My dusty old uncle, as you call him, is Julian Vance. And yes, I'll be staying at the family home on 72nd Street until my own place is prepared. Your own place? What place I've been paying for your life for 10 years. Elara, he shouted. This was his truth, the one he had constructed. He, the self-made man, had rescued her from a boring life of inherited privilege. Elara finally looked at him, and for the first time, Richard saw the Vance in her eyes. It wasn't fire, it was ice. Richard, do you have any idea who I am? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. You married a Vance. You were so blinded by the prestige of the name that you never once bothered to look at the ledger. You think you have money, you have debt, you have leverage, you have a brand built on perception. My family, we have assets. We don't build houses on sand, Richard. We own the sand. He was stunned into silence. You've been, what, tolerating me? He whispered, the insult landing like a physical blow. I've been amused by you, she corrected. But the amusement has worn off. You've become a cliché, a middle-aged man leaving his wife for a model. It's so boring. She walked back into the dressing room. He heard the metallic snick of suitcase latches. You can't talk to me like that, he roared, following her. I am Richard Sterling. I built this. You did? She agreed, placing a stack of folded cashmere sweaters into a Goyard trunk. And you will be left with it. I'll ruin you, he threatened, but it sounded weak, childish. "I'll tell page 6 you're a cold, frigid snob. You'll tell page 6 whatever your new publicist, the one Isabella recommends, tells you to say. It will be a conscious uncoupling, and you will spin it as you being incredibly generous to your estranged wife. I know the game, Richard. Frankly, I'm relieved I no longer have to play." She zipped the trunk. A car, a discreet black Mercedes S-Class, that was not one of Richard's fleet of Rolls-Royces, was already crunching up the gravel driveway. "You'll regret this, Ilara," he said, his voice cracking. She paused at the door, her trunks already being handled by a driver who looked more like a security agent. "No, Richard, you will." She walked out of the $80 million mansion without a single look back. Richard Sterling stood alone in his glass cathedral, the silence of the house suddenly deafening. He had his mansion, his model, and his empire. He had never felt so small. The divorce proceedings were surgically fast. Just as Ilara had predicted, Richard's team, led by the infamously theatrical divorce lawyer Marty the Shark Klein, was prepared for a war of attrition. Marty, a man who wore diamond pinky rings and snakeskin boots, swaggered into the first and only meeting. Ilara was represented by Mr. Harrison, a man in his late 70s, who wore a perpetually disappointed expression and a suit that was probably older than Marty. Harrison's firm had handled the Vance family's affairs since the Roosevelt administration. "Look, Harrison," Marty began, tossing a Mont Blanc pen on the table. "Richard is a very generous man. He's willing to offer, let's call it, a golden parachute. A lump sum, say $5 million. Plus she keeps her baubles. In exchange, a full NDA, and she waives all future claims to Sterling properties, marital or otherwise." Mr. Harrison slowly put on his reading glasses. He looked at the paper Marty had slid across the table as if it were something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "Mr. Klein," Harrison said, his voice a dry rustle. "My client, Ms. Vance." "Mrs. Sterling," Marty corrected. "Ms. Vance," Harrison repeated with a flicker of steel, "has no interest in Mr. Sterling's generosity. She has, in fact, prepared her own terms." He slid a single sheet of vellum paper across the table. Marty scanned it, his cigar-chomping bravado faltering. He read it again. This is it," he stammered. "A list of furniture, a desk and 12 paintings. She wants no alimony, no stake in the company, no cash settlement. Ms. Vance is not in need of a settlement, Mr. Klein. She simply wants her personal property, which I might add was on loan to the marital home. The paintings are from her private collection. The desk belonged to her great-grandmother." Marty, for the first time in his career, was speechless. He'd come expecting to battle over hedge funds, offshore accounts, and the Southampton property. Instead, he was negotiating over a piece of antique furniture. "But the house," Marty said, recovering. "Richard built it, but she lived there. Community property, we could argue." "You could," Harrison interrupted. "And you would lose. The asset is held by Sterling Point, LLC, a Delaware corporation of which Mr. Sterling is the sole managing partner. It was never co-mingled. My client has no interest in it. She finds the property, and I quote, ostentatiously drafty." Marty was defeated. It was the easiest multi-million-dollar divorce of his life, and it felt like a total loss. He had no leverage. He couldn't even threaten them. "Fine," Marty snapped. "We'll sign." The story hit page 6 48 hours later. Sterling's solo act. Richard Sterling and Ilara Vance split. Sources say The property mogul was incredibly generous as model Isabella Monet moves in. Richard hated that they used her maiden name. He and Isabella were photographed a week later, kissing on a yacht in St. Bart's. Isabella had moved into the Sterling Point and immediately begun her reign. Her first act was to hire a new, trendy interior designer. "This place is so cold," she complained, running her hand over the minimalist Italian marble. "It needs life. It needs me." Elara's muted museum-quality neutrals were ripped out. Walls were painted a glittering, textured gold. Animal print rugs were thrown over the white oak floors. A 20-foot-tall portrait of Isabella nude and draped in vulgari snakes was commissioned for the main atrium. Richard, high on the fumes of his new life, approved every expense. The redecoration cost $3 million. The parties were constant. Dom Perignon flowed not by the bottle in their circles, but by the case. Isabella's friends, a flock of influencers, models, and DJs, descended on the house every weekend, documenting every vulgar detail for their millions of followers. "See," Richard would say to his own reflection, his pupils slightly dilated. "This is life. This is passion." Meanwhile, Elara Vance had disappeared. Or rather, she had returned to her world. She'd taken up residence in her family's 6-story limestone townhouse on East 72nd Street, a fortress of quiet old-world power. She wasn't mourning. She was working. Her days were spent in the climate-controlled archives of her family's private art foundation. She was planning, not revenge. Revenge was so messy. Elara was planning a correction, a market adjustment. She had lunch with her uncle Julian Vance at Le Bernardin. Julian was a man who spoke in whispers, but whose words could destabilize governments. He was the patriarch, the true head of the Vance dynasty. "You're well, Elara?" he asked, tasting his wine. "I'm very well, Uncle Julian." "This person, Sterling, he was indiscreet. He was disrespectful. To you and, by extension, to this family. He's a product of his time," Elara said. "He believes his own press. And Page 6 is a poor substitute for the Wall Street Journal," Julian noted. "He's over-leveraged. His new Dubai project is ambitious. Ambitious. He's financed it with junk bonds and handshake deals with questionable partners," Julian said. "He needs a massive infusion of capital in the next 6 months or the entire tower of cards collapses." Elara was silent, sipping her water. "He's exposed," Julian continued. "He thinks that house in Southampton is his fortress. He doesn't realize it's his primary liability. The upkeep alone is astronomical, and his new companion has famously expensive taste." "She does," Elara agreed. "A man who builds his house on sand," Julian mused. "Sooner or later the tide comes in. Tell me, Elara, that house, did you ever like it?" Elara thought for a moment. "I liked the view. The land is significant. The house itself is an insult to architecture." Julian Vance nodded slowly, a small, cold smile touching his lips. "Significant land? Yes, it is." He signaled for the check. "I'm glad you're back, Elara. It's time to get back to the family business." The next 6 months were a blur of golden, glorious, expensive chaos for Richard Sterling. Life with Isabella was a non-stop performance. It was fashion weeks in Milan, F1 in Monaco, and impromptu trips to Tokyo to buy rare Rolex watches. Richard was funding a lifestyle not just for one person, but for Isabella's entire 15-person entourage. You have to spend money to make money. Baby, she'd shout over the music in a club, ordering another $25,000 bottle of Ace of Spades, champagne, to be sprayed over the crowd. Richard, caught in the undertow of her youth and fame, would just laugh and sign the bill. But back in New York, the numbers weren't working. The Sterling Tower in Dubai, his legacy project, was in trouble. He was at his desk in his sleek Manhattan office, a glass box overlooking Central Park. His assistant, Greg, a nervous young man who lived in terror of him, was reading the latest report. "Sir, the Al-Jamil family. They've pulled their second-round funding," Greg stammered, afraid to make eye contact. "What pulled it?" "Pulled it. They promised me that 200 million. I had dinner with the sheikh." Richard roared, slamming his fist on his desk. They said they were re-evaluating their international real estate exposure. Sir, their banker. It's the Vance Trust." Richard froze. Vance. What the hell does Elara's dusty old family have to do with my Dubai deal? They don't, exactly. But the Vance Trust holds the note on the Al-Jamil family's London properties. The word is the Vances advised them to pull back from high-risk developments. High risk, I'm high risk. Richard was vibrating with rage. I'm Richard Sterling. I'm the safest bet in the world. Sir, without that 200 million, we can't make the next construction payment. The entire project will halt. The penalty clauses are staggering. "Get me a loan," Richard shouted. "Call Goldman. Call J.P. Morgan. Use the Sterling point as collateral. It's worth 80 million easy. I'll get 40 million by tomorrow." Greg looked even sicker. "Sir, I tried. Both banks. They've declined. Declined. My credit is flawless. They said the asset is too specialized. A single-owner trophy home. They said its valuation is subjective. And, sir, our company's debt-to-liquid asset ratio is too high. Too high. It's high because I'm building things you can't build without debt." But he knew what it meant. The banks were spooked. That dusty old Vance name, whispered in the right boardroom, carried more weight than all his Forbes covers combined. The Vances didn't have to do anything. They just had to suggest. They were the house, and he was just a gambler on a losing streak. He flew back to Southampton that night in his helicopter, his stomach in knots. He was $200 million short. He was burning through his personal cash at a rate of $1 million a week just to keep Isabella happy. He landed on the helipad of his mansion to find a full-scale rave in progress. A famous DJ was set up by the pool. There were at least 300 people on his lawn. He stormed into the house, finding Isabella dancing on a custom-made marble table, a magnum of tequila in her hand. "Isabella, what the hell is this?" he screamed, grabbing her arm. "It's a party, baby. Lighten up," she shrieked, clearly drunk. "I'm celebrating my new Vogue cover. I don't care about your damn cover. We have to stop this, the spending, all these leeches." He gestured at her friends. Isabella's face turned from joy to a cold reptilian fury in an instant. She jumped off the table. "Leeches. These are my friends. This is my career. This is the life you promised me. Don't you dare come in here and try to be boring. Don't be hurt, Elara. Your boring, frigid old wife. Is that what you want? To go back to her because I can be on a plane to Paris in an hour. Richard, there are a dozen billionaires who would beg to pay for my parties." The threat was clear. The passion and fire he'd left his wife for was entirely conditional. It was a transaction. He was paying for the experience of being with Isabella Monet, and he had just missed a payment. No baby, of course. Not. He stammered, his anger deflating into panic. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Losing her would be a public admission that he'd failed. It would be the final humiliation. I'm just stressed. The Dubai project. Ugh, business. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Don't be so needy, Richard. Go get a drink. She turned her back on him and cranked the music louder. Richard stood there, invisible in his own home, surrounded by strangers, the music pulsing like a migraine. He was hemorrhaging money from every direction. The $80 million mansion suddenly felt like a tomb. He had to get liquid. He had to get it now. Greg, he barked into his phone, walking to a quiet corner of the estate. Put the house on the market. Tomorrow. Sir. The Sterling Point. Yes. Are you deaf? But be discreet. I don't want a for sale sign. I want an off-market listing. Target Russian oligarchs, Chinese billionaires, someone who wants a trophy and will pay cash. Price $85 million. Not a penny less. He hung up. He looked at the house, lit up against the night sky, pulsing with music he hated. It was his greatest triumph, and now he had to sell it to pay for the supermodel who was ignoring him. The irony was so bitter he could barely breathe. Elara Vance, meanwhile, was having a renaissance. She had done something no Vance had done in 50 years. She'd opened a public-facing business. It was a small 3-story gallery in Chelsea called Vance Contemporary. It was an instant, staggering success. Not because it was flashy, but because it was the opposite. The opening night featured no celebrities, no DJs, no paparazzi. It featured 4 unknown painters, a string quartet playing Shostakovich and Elara herself in a simple black dress passionately explaining the brushwork of a young artist from Belgium. The New York Times art critic, a notoriously difficult man named Harrison Dubois, wrote a 2-page spread. For years, he wrote, "Art has become a commodity, a plaything for the new money investor." With Vance Contemporary, Elara. Vance has done the impossible. She has made art again. She is without question the most important new voice in the art world. She has the one thing the market flippers lack: taste. Collectors' museums and old money patrons flocked to her. She was the new arbiter of class. In leaving Richard, she hadn't become invisible. She had become essential. She was photographed at museum galas, not as a +1, but as the guest of honor. Richard saw the articles. He saw the pictures of Elara looking serene, intelligent, and powerful, surrounded by people who wouldn't return his calls. He'd scroll through them, his knuckles white, then switch to Isabella's Instagram, which was full of selfies in bikinis and videos of her drunk at 3 a.m. He had traded a Rolex for a Swatch, and the world knew it. His professional life was unraveling just as fast. The listing for the Sterling Point was a disaster. The discreet off-market offering had of course been leaked to the New York Post. Sterling's point of no return. Mogul's $85 billion palace on the block as Dubai project stalls. The story cast a pall over his company. Suddenly, contractors were demanding payment up front. Lenders were calling in minor debts. The sharks were circling, and the house wouldn't sell. "What do you mean, no offers?" Richard bellowed at the high-end broker. It's the most famous house in the Hamptons." "Famous, yes," the broker, a sleek woman named Samantha, said coolly. "But it's a very specific taste, Richard. The gold leaf walls, the nightclub-grade sound system. It's not what the current market wants. The current market wants, well, frankly, they want what Elara Vance has. Quiet, timeless, old-world charm." "It's a monument," he insisted. "Monuments are for history books. People want homes." He was trapped. He couldn't lower the price. It would be an admission of desperation. He couldn't not sell because the Dubai penalties were mounting, and Isabella had just discovered a passion for haute couture gowns, which she wore once and then discarded. He was sitting in his office, his head in his hands, when Greg knocked. "Sir, there's an offer on the house." Richard shot up. "Who? How much was it, the Russian?" "No, sir. It's an LLC, a domestic corporation based in Delaware. It's called Arrowhead Holdings." "Arrowhead, never heard of them. What's the offer?" They're offering full asking price, $85 million. Richard stared. "Full asking in this market?" "Yes, sir. And—" Greg paused, checking the paper. "All cash. They waive all inspections, and they want to close in 10 days. It was a miracle, a lifeline. He was saved. "Take it," Richard yelled. "Take it. I don't care if it's the cartel draft the papers. Get it done. Now." "Yes, sir," Greg scrambled out. Richard poured himself a massive glass of Macallan 25. He was back. He was Richard Sterling. He'd done it again. He'd stared into the abyss, and he hadn't blinked. He picked up his phone to call Isabella to tell her they were going to celebrate. She didn't answer. Her Instagram story showed she was in Paris at a fitting at the Chanel atelier. "Oops," the caption read. A picture of a $100,000 dress was next. He didn't even care. He was $85 million richer. He could pay for the dress. He could fund Dubai. He was back. The closing was set for the following Friday. Richard, in his arrogance, planned one last "fuck you" party at the mansion for the night before. He would drain the cellars, trash the place, and hand the keys to the anonymous buyers in the morning. Elara heard the news from her uncle. "Arrowhead Holdings has an accepted offer," Julian said over the phone. He was at his desk looking at a painting of a naval battle. "Is it done then?" Elara asked. She was at her own gallery, prepping for a new show. "Almost. The rat has taken the cheese," Julian said. "He's planning a party, a final desecration. I think it's time to finalize the transaction. Publicly." "What do you mean? The house is yours, my dear. Or rather, it's the foundation's. I thought you might like to be there for the final walkthrough. After all, you have to accept the keys." A slow smile spread across Elara's face. "Uncle Julian, you are a menace." "I am a Vance, Elara. As are you. We protect our own, and we tidy up. I'll send a car for you on Friday, 10 a.m. Wear something appropriate." The party was apocalyptic. Richard, flush with the impending $85 million, had decided to burn the house to the ground, metaphorically. He flew in Tiesto to DJ. He hired the entire staff of Nobu to cater. He told Isabella to invite everyone, and she did. By 3 a.m., the house was a wreck. A rented Lamborghini was in the infinity pool. The new animal print carpets were stained with wine and ash. Someone had inexplicably spray-painted Isabella's palace on the white marble wall of the atrium. Richard didn't care. He was drunk, victorious, and surrounded by beautiful, shallow people. He felt like a Roman emperor. "To me," he toasted, standing on the bar, champagne pouring down his shirt. To Richard F. King Sterling. To Richard, they all screamed back, none of them knowing or caring that he was a hair's breadth from total bankruptcy. When the sun rose, the scene was one of utter devastation. The staff, paid triple, were trying to scrub the evidence away. Richard was passed out in a cabana. Isabella was long gone, having left with a musician for an after-party. At 9 a.m., Greg, his eyes twitching, had to physically shake his boss awake. Sir, the buyers. They're here. The final walkthrough is at 10 a.m. Ugh. What? Richard sat up, his head splitting. They're here. Why so early? It's 10 a.m., sir. As scheduled. Fine. Richard splashed water on his face, put on a pair of sunglasses, and swallowed 4 aspirin. He was still in his tuxedo from the night before. Let's get this over with. Give me the keys. I'll meet them. Get the check, and we're gone. He stumbled out onto the grand driveway, which was littered with confetti and broken glass. He saw a car approaching, but it wasn't the Maybach or Rolls-Royce he expected from a billionaire buyer. It was a 1960s Bentley S2 Continental, a quiet, elegant, old money car, painted a discreet shade of dark green. It crunched to a halt. A driver in a simple black suit got out and opened the rear door. Out stepped Mr. Harrison, his ancient, judgmental lawyer. Harrison, Richard barked, confused. What the hell are you doing here? Mr. Sterling, Harrison said, with a sniff of disdain looking at the debauchery. I am here representing the buyers. The buyers you, who is it, who is Arrowhead Holdings? A second person emerged from the car. It was Alara. She was wearing a cream-colored Loro Piana cashmere coat and simple trousers. Her hair was pulled back. She looked calm, rested, and utterly in control. She looked at the house, at the graffiti, at the hung-over state of her ex-husband, and her expression didn't flicker. Alara, Richard whispered. His blood ran cold. The aspirin, the champagne, the victory, it all curdled in his stomach. Richard, she said, her voice even. You've been busy. You bought my house, he stammered, a laugh bordering on a sob escaping his lips. You bought this too. What? To get back at me. You spent $85 million to spite me. He was grasping, trying to find a narrative where he was still the main character. Don't be ridiculous, Richard, Alara said, as if speaking to a child. I didn't buy your house. I don't have $85 million in liquid cash. That's your game. Then who? Arrowhead Holdings, she said, is a subsidiary of the Vance Family Foundation. The foundation did buy your house, or rather, as I told my uncle. They bought the land. The view. Richard's mind was failing to compute. The foundation. A charity. What does a charity want with a mansion? Oh, they don't, Alara said. She walked past him towards the front door, which was hanging slightly off one hinge. They have no use for the house at all. I don't understand, Richard said, following her, panic rising in his throat. The foundation, Alara explained. Stopping in the atrium and looking up at the grotesque spray-painted graffiti, is in the process of building the new Vance Wing for the New York Museum of Modern Art, a project that unfortunately was delayed by an investor who defaulted on his pledge. She looked at him. He was that investor. He'd pledged $50 million to the museum, to get his name on a wall and had quietly defaulted 3 months ago. The foundation, she continued, has decided to liquidate some of its less essential real estate holdings to fund the wing themselves. For instance, this incredibly valuable plot of land in Southampton. Liquidate, you just bought it. Yes, an acquisition and a liquidation, Elara said. We've already resold it. Richard's world tilted. Resold it. To who, for how much? We sold it to the developer who owns the adjacent 3 properties. He's been trying to acquire this land for a decade to build his new golf course. He paid $95 million. The $10 million profit will be a lovely donation to the foundation. $95 million? Richard's knees felt weak. He'd been so desperate he'd sold to the first offer, not even realizing he'd left $10 million on the table. But the house. Oh, the developer. He hates the house too, Elara said. He's tearing it down. The demolition crew arrives at noon. Richard physically recoiled. Tearing it down? My house. My masterpiece. It's not a masterpiece, Richard. It's a badly built nightclub with a plumbing problem. The demolition, she added, checking her watch, is in 1 hour. This was the final blow. It wasn't just a sale. It wasn't revenge. It was erasure. He wasn't even a footnote. He was a mistake that was being bulldozed. But why? He whispered, sinking onto a ruined velvet ottoman. Why? You, Elara. Why do this to me? Elara turned to him, and the ice was back. Do this to you, Richard. You seem to be under the impression that this was about you. It wasn't. You defaulted on the Al-Jamil loan. My uncle's bank held the note. You defaulted on your pledge to the museum. My family chairs the museum. You weren't a rival, Richard. You were a mess. We were simply tidying up. This was just business. Business, he repeated numbly. Yes, you taught me that. You said your money was real and my family was dusty. You just forgot something. Dust settles, but it never goes away. The Vance dynasty was here 100 years before you, and it will be here 100 years after you're gone. Mr. Harrison stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, the funds have been wired to your account, minus the $50 million pledge you defaulted on to the museum, for which the foundation graciously covered your debt, and of course the closing costs and the $50,000 fee for cleaning this. Richard looked at his phone. A wire transfer alert. The $85 million had become $34.9 million. Enough to stop the immediate bleeding on the Dubai project, but not nearly enough to save it. It was a mortal wound. You bitch! He spat the word, lacking any force. Elara didn't even flinch. Goodbye, Richard. I hope you find the fire you were looking for. She turned and walked out the door, stepping gracefully over a shattered baccarat vase. Richard Sterling sat alone in the ruins of his $84 million monument, the sound of the ocean drowned out by the approaching rumble of bulldozers. He didn't move. He just stared at the wall where Isabella's palace was already starting to peel. He collapsed, not a physical faint, but a complete, hollow-eyed spiritual surrender. He just gave up. The demolition of the Sterling Point was efficient and brutal. By 4 p.m. it was rubble. By the end of the week, the land was flat as if the house had never existed. The Post ran a single snarky headline, Sterling's house flip Flops. Vance family. Tears down tacky mansion. The public humiliation was total. Richard Sterling was radioactive. The $35 million he'd cleared was vaporized in 2 weeks, eaten by penalty fees from Dubai and the avalanche of creditors who, seeing the news, demanded their money now. He tried to call Isabella. She was in Milan, and her phone went straight to voicemail. He texted her, "I'm in trouble, baby. I need you." She texted back 5 hours later, "Richard, I'm sorry. I can't be with a man who isn't successful. It's bad for my brand. My publicist will release a statement. I wish you the best." He was in his rented Tribeca penthouse. The lease was up in 30 days when he saw her Instagram post. She was on a yacht in Lake Como with the Al Jamil Sheikh. "New Horizons," the caption read. Richard threw his phone against the wall. It shattered. A week later, Sterling Properties filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The Dubai Tower was seized by his partners. His Manhattan office, his fleet of cars, his Tom Ford suits, all were seized by the bank. He was, for the first time since he was 20 years old, completely and totally broke. He was worse than broke. He was in debt, and his name was toxic. Elara Vance read the news on Bloomberg while sitting in her office at the Chelsea Gallery. She was reviewing the catalogue for her next show, New Perspectives in Postmodern Sculpture. Her assistant knocked. "Miss Vance, Mr. Richard Sterling is here to see you." Elara looked up, surprised. "Here? Yes, he doesn't have an appointment. He looks unwell." Elara considered it for a moment. "Fine. Send him in. And bring 2 coffees." Richard entered. He was a different man. His suit was wrinkled, his face was gaunt, and the arrogant fire in his eyes was gone. He was just a tired, defeated man. "Elara," he said, his voice hoarse. "Richard, this is a surprise," she said, gesturing to a chair. He sat. I don't know why I'm here," he said, staring at his hands. "I guess I wanted to see, to ask what Richard for money for. What pity. I want to know. Was it all a lie?" he whispered. "Our 10 years. Did you ever love me? Or was I just amusing?" Elara looked at him, and the ice in her demeanor softened just slightly into a cold, clear water. "I did love you, Richard. Once. A long time ago. I loved your drive, your energy. I loved that you weren't like the boys I grew up with. You built things. I admired that. Then why? Because you stopped loving me," she said, her voice firm. "You stopped seeing me. You saw Vance. You saw a trophy. And when that wasn't shiny enough, you traded it in for a different one. You didn't just leave me, Richard. You dismissed me. You dismissed my family, my life, my worth. You stood in the house my family's name helped you build, and you told me I was nothing without you." She leaned forward. All of this. She gestured to the bankruptcy news on her screen. "This wasn't my uncle. This wasn't my family. This was you. My family just let it happen. They removed the safety net you never even knew you had. You built your empire on a foundation of Vance credit, Vance connections, and Vance tolerance. When you betrayed me, you didn't just lose a wife. You lost your entire infrastructure." Richard just stared, the full, devastating truth finally landing. He hadn't been a self-made man. He had been a sponsored one. What do I do now?" he asked, a broken man. "I don't know, Richard," Elara said. She pushed one of the coffees toward him. "You're a builder. You said so yourself. So, build. Start over. This time, build it on rock, not sand. He looked at the coffee. He looked at her. She was a queen in her own right, secure, powerful, and fair. He stood up, not touching the drink. Goodbye, Elara, he said. Goodbye, Richard. He walked out of the gallery, past the priceless art, and onto the street. He was just a man in a rumpled suit. He had no car, no home, no one. He started walking with no destination in mind. 1 year later, the Southampton landscape had changed. Where the Stirling Point had once stood, there was now a sprawling, beautiful one-story public art pavilion. It was called the Vance Pavilion for the Arts. It was a masterpiece of glass fieldstone and light designed by a Pritzker prize-winning architect. It housed a rotating collection of sculptures and offered free art classes to the community. Its gardens, which ran down to the ocean, were open to the public. Elara Vance was at the opening ceremony. She wasn't in the spotlight. She was in the crowd watching a group of local children learning to paint the ocean. Her uncle Julian stood beside her. It's beautiful, Elara, he said. A much better use of the view. It is, she agreed. It feels right. The New York Times ran a glowing piece on it. A monument to generosity. How Elara Vance turned a symbol of 21st century excess into a beacon of public culture. She had taken Richard's monument to ego and transformed it into a legacy of culture. In Milan, Isabella Monet was photographed arguing with the Al-Jamil Sheikh, who had just traded her in for an even younger 19-year-old influencer from Russia. Her Vogue covers had dried up. She was last seen hosting a Red Bull promotion on a beach in Ibiza. Her fire had burned out. And Richard Stirling. He was in Austin, Texas. He was working as a junior project manager for a small commercial construction firm. He lived in a rented one-bedroom apartment. He was driving a Ford Focus. He was in fact building. He was starting over. He kept a small laminated clipping in his wallet. It wasn't of his old Forbes covers. It was the article about Elara's new pavilion. He was at a building site in a hard hat, yelling at a contractor about rebar, when his phone rang. It was an unknown New York number. He answered. Stirling? Richard, it's Elara. He froze. Elara. Wow. Hello. Hello. I heard you were in Austin, that you were building again. Yeah, small stuff, office parks, but it's honest work, he said. I know, she said. My foundation. We're funding a new low-income housing project in East Austin. We need a senior manager, someone who knows how to build but who also knows what it's like to lose it all. Someone who'll build it right. Richard was silent. He couldn't speak. It's a job, Richard, she said, her voice not cold, not warm, but clear. If you want it, it's a chance to build something that lasts. He looked at the dusty blueprint in his hand, then at the sky. He had lost his mansion. He had lost his wife. He had lost his Montpellier, but in the ruins he'd found a single, tiny, buried seed. Yes, he said, his voice thick. Elara. Yes, I'd like that. She had bought his mansion. She had torn it down. And in doing so, she had given him the one thing his millions could never buy a chance at redemption. Thank you for watching this story. We see so often in life that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. Richard Stirling built his entire life on the idea of power, but Elara Vance wielded the reality of it. She didn't have to scream. She just had to wait. She knew that true power, true legacy isn't about what you own. It's about what you can build, what you can give, and what you're willing to protect. What did you think of Ilara's ultimate move? Was it cold-blooded revenge, or was it simply the consequences of Richard's own actions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales of drama justice and the powerful lessons of life, please make sure to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for new stories every week.